Jason, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks for joining us, folks. We've huge numbers on the call again for ultimately what is our second last athletic development webinar of the present webinar series. So we've previously touched on aerobic conditioning, speed, nutrition, wellness, monitoring, and resistance training. So we're trying to piece the puzzles together of what is athletic development, and I suppose this webinar tonight is going to lead in nicely then to a webinar we've planned in April for maximizing the Be Ready program. Some of you on the call might be aware of that, but I suppose this is going to lead in nicely to that program. So I suppose we felt that the fitness testing is something that we see done a lot across GA clubs across the county and across the country, and it's something we feel there's probably an area where a bit of guidance is required, and we're hopefully going to provide that to you tonight. So with that, I'm just going to move on a slide here. So what are we going to test? I suppose it's important to have an understanding of what the components of fitness are. So we have our cardiovascular endurance, we have our muscular endurance, our strength, our flexibility, and our body composition on the left-hand side. Moving to the right, we've got our power, our speed, agility, quickness. We've got reaction time, balance, and coordination / motor skills. So they're all components that encompass the sport of football, hurling, ladies football, and camogie across the spectrum. And tonight we're probably going to try and touch on every one of those aspects and give you some guidance on what kind of tests we would recommend to run and how we'd recommend to run those tests. So like all webinars, and I'm sure some of you on the call have joined a lot of our webinars, we're going to go through the what, the how, and the why tonight. And this is the what. So I'll just move on a slide there. So the outcomes of tonight, hopefully we get a basic understanding of what fitness testing is, the importance of it, particularly before competition, when and why we should test and what type of test we should do, and what you coaches can do on the call if you do have minimum equipment. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that some of the videos that we will show you tonight, we've got equipment that does cost a nice bit of money, okay? And what we're going to do is provide you an alternative to test the same modality with very, very little equipment or very low costing equipment. So I suppose that leads us to the question, why do we fitness test? So bar the manager coming in and telling us them players aren't fit, which is probably happens a lot. Why do we fitness test? Well, firstly, we look to identify weaknesses within our squad, within our players. We look to identify strengths also. We want to monitor the progress of our programs. So if we do have a training program in place, be it a strength and conditioning coaches program, a skills coaches program, a managers program, so be it. We just want to monitor if we're actually making progressive changes to those players. We want to provide the players with feedback, provide our coaches with feedback, and then educate, I suppose, which is, I know there's a lot of senior coaches on the call. I suppose the one thing that I would see as a standout is athletes these days are craving information, and even kids these days from 13 to 17, they just crave information on themselves, how they're doing, how they can improve. So it's probably educating those players and coaches as well. It's also a prediction of performance, so or a / talent identification model. Okay, so we can see from a very young age, leading right through youth up to adults, who is performing well in these tests. We can use that then as nearly a baseline to standardize our tests off in terms of our other players on that team. And then it's the nice little thing that we can look into a little bit deeper if we do have the interest is potentially looking at position-specific fitness testing and position-specific normative values and requirements for those positions, because the way the GA has gone and the standard 15 across all codes is pretty much gone now, and there's different requirements for a cornerback these days than there was maybe even 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. It's constantly changing, so it's important to have that understanding that it's not a one size fits all when it comes to fitness testing. You might have some players who are very aerobically fit, whereas you might have some players who are very fast, very sharp, or very strong. And it's about recognizing does their fitness test results and does their strengths in those areas cross over to the position they play in the field. And if not, potentially maybe that's something to think about and something to look at with that player. So what do we What do I test? The selection criteria, I would stand by this. If you're going away in the morning and you're picking a fitness test, these are some of the things I would potentially look at fitness test. Okay, sorry, the slides aren't moving there, are they? Connor, can you just move on to selection criteria, slide number 5?
Yeah, it's up on my screen, Jay, so I'd say we should be okay.
Okay, perfect. If that's happening to anyone else, guys, just let's put it into the chat there. And if not, I'll keep going.
It's probably just worth mentioning there as well, Jason, I suppose, that the speed of the slides will be reliant on the internet at the far side, I suppose. Isn't that the case?
Yeah.
So there may be a delay for some people. They'll appear straight away for some. Others, there might be a slight delay.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. And if that keeps happening, what I'd say to that person there is just log out of the meeting and log back in, and that might work for you. But again, it's internet dependent. Okay. So if it's working for you guys, I'll drive on. So what do I fitness test? So again, if like I was saying, if you're to wake up in the morning and you're thinking about doing a fitness test, so some of the selection criteria I potentially recommend to you are: what's its relevance? Is it specific to what you're looking to achieve? Is it practical? Is it reliable? And is it valid? And when we dig a little bit deeper into those areas, then, so the relevance, the energy requirements of the sport, does it mimic the energy requirements of the sport? Or are we just doing a test for the sake of doing a test? Is it specific? Are we targeting the hamstrings? Are we targeting the quads? Are we targeting the upper body mobility if we think about striking and hurling? Or are we just doing a press up test, for example, to failure? Does it mimic the movement patterns? The biggest one when it comes to fitness testing, and definitely for most club coaches across the country, would be the practicality. So first and foremost, have you got a location suitable to test? Is it indoors? Is it an all-weather surface? Or is it outdoors? And the cost of potentially renting out a venue, or the cost of potentially paying someone to come in and do these types of testing. And then the subject, so your players' availability. So that's another big one. Picking a date, picking a test, giving the players plenty of time, I suppose, so to make sure that they're there, and the availability of the venue. We're going to dig a little bit deeper later in this presentation around the reliability and the validity of the test. But effectively, the reliability is it a test that you can retest over and over? And the validity is it proven to work by research? And is the equipment you're using proven to work by research? And they're two of the things that we'll dig in a little bit deeper towards the back end, but there's something definitely worth noting. Okay, so it's at this point I'm going to pass you over to Connor for the next stage of the presentation. What I'd say to you guys is the first couple of slides from my end and Connor's end are very text heavy and are very information based. But again, we just want you to bear with us. There'll be some videos, there'll be a lot of practical applications to come throughout the webinar. So stick with us and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jason. I'll just move forward. Before I start, can you tell me if the test and consideration slide is up for you?
All good.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, so I suppose building on what Jason has spoke about already, there are a number of considerations we need to be cognizant of when we're choosing a test, and I suppose the context of the sport and the test itself is king here. So before we pick a test, regardless of what quality we're looking at, we need to, I suppose, be aware of the demands of the sport. And previous webinars we've done have looked at that in depth. So the test needs to relate to what your players are going to be doing in a game, because if it doesn't, ultimately it's probably not the best use of your time. From that, then it needs to be something that's practical for you to use, that you're able to use it to monitor your players regularly and make decisions off it. Because I suppose a lot of the time in the GAA, fitness testing can be seen as a box ticking exercise that we'll do it for the preseason and we'll do our 1K test, but we won't look at it again. So I suppose if you are doing a test, regardless of what that quality is and what that test is, it's important that you refer back to it, and I suppose you infer whatever it means and that it impacts your training or your training load or your program, whatever that may be. And I suppose leading on to that is what is the skill set of the person that will be carrying out the test. So do you have an S&C coach in your club, or is it going to be a volunteer? So again, if it's someone who doesn't have a background in this area, perhaps they're not going to be, I suppose, conducting the more complicated tests per se. But again, we'll delve into a little bit deeper. There is a test that's applicable to everyone, and that's easy to administer for everyone, for each, I suppose, physical quality that we consider important for football, hurling, camogie, ladies football. So again, the skill set there is important, and I suppose, as Jason touched on, the access to our athletes. So I suppose the limitations of the GAA is that we might only have our players for 6 hours of their 168-hour week. So we have to choose a test that's time efficient. The test needs to, I suppose, be something that you can do quickly, and if possible, get the whole squad of players through quickly, or as quick as you can, because the access to the players is limited, and we also don't want to be detracting from their training time, because ultimately the end goal is to improve our ability to put the ball over the bar in the back of the net. So that has to be our first priority too. And then again, as Jason said, we have to be cognizant of the number of athletes that we have to be testing. So choosing a test that allows us to look at a large number of athletes at a time is something that we'd be recommending there. So I suppose the first area we're going to look at is strength, and I suppose it's something that's thrown around, and we see it a lot in our games nowadays. We see a big hit in a game and we think, geez, that player is fair strong. But I suppose what is strength in practice, and the literature will tell us it's a high degree of muscular strength has been recognised as a key contributor to performance. So what does that mean? If you can produce a lot of force, it is going to have a positive impact on your performance on field, which again is what we want to do. We want to improve and increase the performance of our players. Our sport is played on one leg, and I suppose it's very important that we are strong on one leg, and high levels of lower limb strength have been associated with superior jumping, sprinting, and change of direction performance in our field sport athletes. But also very important, it's related to reducing injury risk. We're never going to prevent injury, but if we can reduce it and improve our performance of our players a little bit and make them that little bit robust, well, then we've done our job ultimately. And then lastly, I suppose what we've been talking about so far, it's very important that whatever tests you are doing, and whatever physical quality you are assessing, that you use that information to your own discretion, but it has to I suppose influence your practice, influence your programming, influence your decisions, and influence your training. Otherwise, again, is there much point in doing it? So I suppose we have to use our testing regimen to assess the effects of our program more so than the improvements of an athlete, because I suppose it does go back to the testing skill of our tester, and we'll chat about the reliability and validity later on. But if the person administering the test isn't skilled at it, and we see a huge jump in strength or improvement in aerobic performance all of a sudden, is that really a true change? So we have to be aware of that as well. So there are a number of ways of testing our strength, and again, I suppose we might see these areas as being complicated or something that's not accessible to clubs or people with limited equipment, but that's not the case. And again, we'll show you the different tests depending on the equipment you have. So when we are looking at strength testing, so we're looking at measuring the ability of our players to exert their maximal muscular effort ultimately, and that's referred to as a strength diagnosis. So we commonly assess this quality, this maximal strength quality. In the literature, it's during heavy 1RM type test. So you'll, for example, do a 1 rep max back squat to assess your maximum strength. But however, there are limitations with that. First and foremost, we're trying to build Gaelic footballers and hurlers and not powerlifters or weightlifters. So for some of our players, doing a 1RM test isn't a fair representation of how strong they actually are, because I suppose being able to back squat is a technical skill in itself, and if a player is incompetent at doing that, that will lead, I suppose, us down the line of issues regarding injury risk, but also it may not give us an accurate representation of how strong our player actually is. So we have to be aware of that too when we're doing our testing. We could have a player who in reality does have very strong lower limb muscular strength, but they may not be able to express that through a back squat test. So implementing plyometric tests, which we'll show in a while, is something to go, I suppose, get around that issue. And again, 1RM tests, they're fatiguing, they're possibly dangerous if they're not administered correctly. So to avoid that, 3 repetition and 5 repetition testing protocols have been found to be safer, first of all, reliable, second of all, and effective for use with GAA players. So when we do our 3RM and 5RM testing, it's fairly easy to infer what the 1 rep max of that athlete is from those tests. There's plenty of calculations out there, and they're fairly easy to administer, and that might be a better route to go down than doing a 1RM test. So again, I suppose as I've said, our sport is played on one limb. We're always running, jumping, sprinting, changing direction. So it is important to be aware of that. But I suppose again, going back to the limitations with back squat tests and 1RM tests not being, I suppose, proportionally representative of what our athlete's strength is, doing a 1RM test a lower limb unilateral test, so on one leg, may not be a true representation of what our lower limb strength is either. So with that in mind, the gold standard we're, I suppose, professing at club level is a bilateral, so 2-leg, either 3RM back squat or hex bar deadlift. And in GAA players, they've been found to be reliable, so they're testable. So basically what we mean when we say reliable is that if we test them in January and we test them again in March, April, whenever that is, the test is going to give us an accurate result and an accurate change in performance if there is to be one, and we will get into that later on again. But again, I suppose the limitation with our back squat and hex bar deadlift is going back to equipment. So we have given an alternative to the club or the individual with limited equipment, and that's a time wall sit. So you'll see a video of that on the next slide, and of the back squat and hex bar deadlift as well. So for clubs that don't have access to a gym facility or have limited equipment or maybe not enough weight, the time wall sit has been found to be a good alternative. It is reliable, and it's a valid test of muscular endurance. So it's testing what we wanted to test, and it can be useful longitudinally across the season to see if our players are getting stronger in their lower body. So with that, we'll have a look at the videos. So I'll just get them playing here. So the first 2 videos on the left are a squat test, and then we have a hex bar test as well. So again, I suppose while we're saying these are the gold standard, it is important to be aware that when filming these clips, Jason and I didn't necessarily follow a gold standard approach with regard to technique or cueing or warm-ups or rest between sets. These videos are just an illustration ultimately of what these movements will look like and what they might look like in your practical environment. So again, 3RM tests with a squad of players should be fairly practical, shouldn't be too time consuming depending on how you lay out your schedule and your tests and protocol. And again, for the club that mightn't have full access to squat rack as we see in the first couple of videos, or a hex bar in the third one, the time wall sit test, as Jason is showing us there, is a good alternative. So you'll get to watch those videos again in your own time after tonight's session. We will be emailing out the slides, so if they did jump a little or if they weren't as clear as they could be, don't worry about that. You'll see them after. Okay, so moving on. Previously, I suppose I looked at the maximal strength and maximal force output of our lower limb. So I suppose looking at those and the transfer to pitch performance, as I say, those previous tests were tests of maximum strength and how much force we can produce ultimately. However, I suppose the Gaelic games of hurling, football, camogie, ladies football are all about force and speed and power and how quick we can produce these movements. So it doesn't matter ultimately how strong we are, if we can't apply this strength in a dynamic situation, which is our game. So another alternative to, I suppose, looking at that, and that'll work alongside your maximal strength testing, is your power testing. So what we call reactive strength index testing. So ultimately, when we're doing this, we're looking at, fine, we might have good maximal strength, but how can we apply this in a dynamic situation, such as landing from a jump, evading a defender, breaking a line. So again, it goes back to the argument of how strong is strong enough. If we can't, I suppose, apply that force in the game situation, which is ultimately what we're trying to, I suppose, get our players ready for. So again, reactive strength index is a nice way of looking at this. It's a good measure to use alongside your lower limb maximal strength testing, as it'll give you that more, I suppose, game specific measure. So RSI, it's a measure of how explosive an athlete is, and the higher the better here. So these, I suppose, the test that we use to assess RSI, and we do have videos in a couple of minutes time, and I'll go into more details to what the tests are, and what we're looking at are our counter movement jump, drop jump, squat jump, standing long jump, and our single leg hop. So again, when we were choosing these tests, we were cognizant of the club that will have a lot of equipment and the club that mightn't have a whole pile. So again, we've chosen tests that I suppose all situations can be accounted for. So if you have the equipment, great. If you don't, you can still assess your player's RSI. So why is it important? Ultimately, I suppose when we're looking at RSI, we're looking at the ability of our players to apply that force in a dynamic game situation. So when we're looking at sprinting and jumping, and we've gone into how important those are in previous webinars, we're looking at a rapid lengthening and shortening of the muscles, and that's known as the stress shortening cycle. So I'll go into more detail on that in just a sec. And it is a very important measure to, I suppose, be aware of and to profile and to track it and see how our players are doing. Because again, fine, get them stronger, but we also need to get them more powerful and get them able to apply that force in a game situation. So why will we profile it? Well, ultimately, I suppose, our games are fast paced in nature. They're powerful in nature. So these qualities have been acknowledged as an essential trait of our game. And using the counter movement jump, which you'll see in a second, alongside the drop jump test, again, which you'll see in a second, they've been found to be valid lower body power and reactive strength tests in GAA players. So again, they're testing exactly what we wanted to test. So we want to see if our players are good dynamically and do have that lower limb power. And these tests will do that for us. They'll do exactly what they say in the tin ultimately. Okay, so looking at it in more detail and I suppose looking at it in practice, the gold standard test here is a chrono jump. So that's a goal or a jump mat. Again, these can be quite expensive, and again, I suppose you have to do an analysis of if getting this equipment is going to improve your ability to score a goal or score a point. But again, if we do want to promote best practice, which is what we want to do, this piece of equipment has been found to be the gold standard when a force platform isn't available, and it's been found to be reliable and ecologically valid. So what that means is that a lot of research and a lot of testing is done in a highly controlled, almost sanitized, perfect environment. And as we know, our games are chaotic. So the tests that we're doing need to, I suppose, be aware of that and be more applicable to our game. So if we, I suppose, don't have the resources to afford a jump mat, there is a good alternative, and it's something I use myself. It's called My Jump 2. So I think it cost me about €15. And it's a very handy little app, so it's low on cost, and it offers good reliability and validity. So it's reliable between tests. So again, there isn't much error from test 1 to test 2, provided you're using it properly. And there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube that the company have done. So it is very easy to use. It's very quick to use. You go through a squad of 30 players in no time with that. And again, it is valid. So it's testing what we wanted to test. And along with that, it's a helpful load monitoring tool. So it self-regulates between tests. So it stores what your players get in each test. So if they train Tuesday and do their jump before training and then they train again on Thursday, it'll have Tuesday's test stored there. So it can assess any fatigue, and if the player is a little bit fatigued, you'll get a little notification and a little bit of flag. So from there, it's probably time to have a chat with the player and see how they are feeling, and if the app is right ultimately, and they are fatigued. Then lastly, if you don't want to spend the €15, single leg hops are a good alternative. So look, they're obviously the cheap and free version of our reactive strength profiling. So they're something I've used as well. They're very handy. They're quick and easy to administer. They've good retest reliability, and they offer an insight into lower limb power, limb symmetry, and neuromuscular control. So again, as I've been saying, our game is played on one leg. So again, it's fine being strong on two, but can we control ourselves on one? And there's plenty of data out there and tables to, I suppose, and scores to compare our player scores to. So if you do choose to administer the test, but aside from that, using your eye and watching the player doing the jump, you'll be able to spot very quickly if the players have different landing strategies in each leg, or maybe if they're not as good landing on left to right, maybe they don't accept that load as good on one leg as the other, and if that's the case, maybe it's a red flag, and it can be used as a little, I suppose, tool to maybe screen for injury and possible risk. So moving on, we're going to look at the counter movement jump, squat jump, and drop jump test. So I'll just get the videos going and I'll talk you through what we're looking at then. 1 second now. Okay. Again, if they're not playing for you, that's fine. You'll get them after. So on the very left here, the first test Jason is doing is a squat jump. So the top one is from front. The second is side on. So it's the same jump, same test. The middle we have a counter movement jump. So you'll see a big difference there in what he's doing, and I'll talk you through that in a second. Again, that's the side on view, and the last one is a drop test, a drop jump test. So again, front view, side view. So I suppose again, it's I suppose going away from here, and you might think, okay, Connor and Jason said, right, we're to do reactive strength index testing and jump testing. But again, the context of what you're testing here is very important. So the difference you'll have noticed in the counter movement jump and the squat jump is in the counter movement jump, which was this video here. Jason jumps high and jumps fast, whereas this one, he squats down, pauses for a second, and gets back up. So what we're looking at here is our stretch, shortening cycle. So what I mentioned just a few slides ago. So when we're looking at the counter movement jump as a whole, it's a combination of the muscles lengthening and shortening to produce a goal. So the goal ultimately here is a jump, and it's jumping high, jumping fast, using that energy from getting down fast to get up fast again. So on the other hand, then the squat jump, which had a little bit of a pause, that's more of an assessment of true force production. So that little pause is going to dissipate that energy Jason might again by squatting down quickly. So this is going to look at his ability to produce force from a standstill, basically. So typically when we are assessing the scores and the tests here, the counter movement jump usually has a higher height or a greater height than its squat jump counterpart. So usually there's a 20 to 30% higher height in centimeters than your squat jump. But again, that might not always be the case. For example, someone who's very, very strong and they might have a poor ability to transfer that energy. So from going from high to low, like Jason did for his counter movement jump, they might have a higher squat jump. So what that means is that while they do have that maximal force and maximal strength that I would have spoke about earlier, they don't have the ability to, I suppose, express that in a dynamic task. So if that is the case and their squat jump is higher than their counter movement jump, that's a red flag straight away that this athlete is probably spending too much time on maximal strength work and isn't doing enough plyometric or power style work. So that's another way of using your testing to, I suppose, alter your program and being aware of your players as well. Finally, then the jump we would have seen on the right, the drop jump test. So Jason is stepping off the box. The second he hits the ground, he's jumping as quick and as high as you can. You can see it here again from the side. So this one is a true measure of reactive strength index. So while we're using the jump mat here, all of these 3 tests can be administered on that My Jump app that I would have spoke about. So again, it's very handy for €15 that you can do all this screening very quickly. So I suppose the drop jump, what we're looking at, it's looking at how, I suppose, an athlete copes and performs during jumping activities. So it's measuring how stiff and how much stress Jason's muscles and tendons can cope with there, and their ability to use that as energy and get back up and jump high. So it ultimately is demonstrating Jason's ability to change quickly from a lengthening action to a shortening action, and it's a good representation of Jason's dynamic explosive vertical jump capacity. So it's a useful tool for seeing how our players are in terms of their power. It's good for monitoring their training progress, and it's also a good tool to monitor fatigue as well. Okay, I'll just move forward. Okay, so we're moving on to upper body testing now, and I suppose the previous few tests for our lower limb, they can be complicated to administer. So the upper body testing is a little bit easier to administer. So again, the gold standard option for our club with a good standard of facility is a 3RM bench and weighted chins test. But again, if you don't have that access to equipment, good alternative is a push-up test, which you'll see in just a second, and also a max repetition chins test. So how many chins we can do ultimately to failure, and they have been found to be valid and reliable measures of upper body strength. So again, they're testing what we want them to test, and there isn't much error between tests. So if we test in January, test in March, we should be getting a result that we can act upon basically, and we can trust. So looking at that then, I'll play the video. So we have, first of all, we have a push-up, and it's to a cone. So the reason we've put the cone in there is ensuring that there's that consistency between reps, that the player is touching their chest off the cone, off the ground, to ensure full range of motion. The other video is playing, and again, it's very important that when they are performing that test, elbows are stacked into sides, body is nice in a nice straight line from ear to hip to ankle, and we're getting full range of motion. So the cone is a nice little cue to ensure that each rep looks the same, and we're getting that full range of motion. Another thing you can implement there is a metronome, so you can get a little app on your phone again that ensures that the players aren't just powering through the reps as quick as they can, but that each rep is smooth and controlled, and looks the same, and gives you a more, I suppose, valid test of their upper body strength. Whereas then we have our bench and chins. So bench test there, and chins as well. So very important when we're doing our chins that we're getting that full range motion again. So ensuring that the athlete's chest is going to the bar, and also when they get to the bottom, that they're starting with their elbows fully locked out each time. Otherwise, it's not a true representation. So you'll see the videos later. I was a little bit tired, so I'm not going to say it's a true representation of my strength. But anyway, Jason, back to you now.
Good man, Connor. Sound. So we got to see you being really strong there now, and I get to go through the running. That's the way it is, yeah. Okay, guys. So
that's it, yeah.
I suppose just before we go away from strength, we spent a lot of time on strength, and there's a reason for that. Strength is probably if you look at it in terms of building a house, strength is probably the foundation of your house in terms of athletic performance. So a strong athlete will be an injury prevention mechanism. It'll be a speed development mechanism. It'll be an endurance performance mechanism. It'll be a flexibility and mobility. The list is endless. So getting your athletes to a position where they're really, really strong is highly, highly important, and it's something that we couldn't recommend enough. So with that being said, then Connor, I'm just going to take control there, and you can tell me if these slides are moving. With that being said, we're going to move on to endurance, and what we've picked here is a 1.2 kilometer time trial measuring your maximum aerobic speed. It's a reliable and valid measure, and it allows us to be more specific with our programming. And the reason I suppose we've picked this, a lot of you are probably familiar with the beep test or the yo-yo, a variant of the yo-yo test, whether it's the IR1 or the IR2. And again, I suppose they are brilliant tests. They're very valid. They're very reliable. But the problem with them is sometimes we can't test them in season because we don't have the facility. We don't have an indoor hall, or we may not have a surface that we can repeat the test on. So we've gone with the road of a 1.2 kilometer test because it's something we can measure on our field. It's something that we can consistently do throughout the season. Yes, the pitches will be softer at some stages of the season. Yes, it will be windy some days. It will be sunny other days. But it's something that we can test with our players. It's something that we can take those aspects into consideration if there is a little bit of a dip or a high increase in the test. But it's definitely something us as club coaches across the country can use throughout the season, is a 1.2. And effectively what it is, it's 12 lengths of the field from just over 21 metres to 21 metre line in most pitches. Now, we would recommend, obviously, that you use a metre wheel or you use some sort of metric that measures that distance. And a couple of the key things, I suppose, that I would have seen with the 1.2 being administrated over the years is the difference in how they're administrated. So sometimes we'll have players line up across the sideline or across the end line, for example, and they'll be all running in their different channels. Other times I've seen it where players have run like a flock of sheep around in a group. Other times I've seen it where one group of players is starting at one end, the other is starting at the other. So I'm not saying any of those are right or wrong. That's up to us on the call to decide. What I am saying, though, is if you're going to test in one of those ways, the next time you test and the next time you test and so on and so forth, you do that measure. And you do that same measure all the time. And that will make your test somewhat reliable in the long run. The easiest probably way to administrate it I've seen from experience over the years is splitting your group in two. So let's say you have 30 athletes, 15 are on the line to start. They're in their own channels. You've got 15 poles at the top, 15 poles at the bottom. That player must stay in his or her channel and they must run around that pole every time for 12 times. With the coach on the sideline calling the time, so 4 minutes, 1 second, 4 minutes, 2 seconds as the player passes his partner, and then his partner gives that time to the coach. That's a really, really simple way for you to manage a group of 30 athletes, 20 athletes in the space of 10 minutes. You'll get an aerobic endurance test pretty much sorted in that regard. The other type of, so that's your aerobic. Your anaerobic then is your RAST or your shuttle run type test. So it's a test that's measuring your athlete's ability without oxygen. Okay, so it's a RAST is a test that we have gone for here, and again we'll be sending out the protocols around that post this webinar. But it's just a running based anaerobic sprint test, and that's all we're looking at. Again, it's been found to be reliable and a valid measure. And it's sport specific, which is very important. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of tests that I've seen up and down the country being done on fields that, let's say, they don't resemble the game. So it's very important that we have a test that does resemble the game, whether that's a shuttle type run test or a RAS type test. So again, DBR2 go-to metrics, so our 1.2 and our RAST for our aerobic and our anaerobic endurance. And again, I suppose guidance around how much or how often we should test to get an adaptation from the program that you're designing or the program that you have with your players. I'd be saying at least between 4 and 8 weeks. Okay, anywhere in around that window, preferably 6-week windows. You would do these testing days. And again, a couple of things that you need to take into consideration there: the stage of the season. So again, you're using common sense. If you've tested 7 weeks pre-championship, for example, you're not going to test a week before championship. And we probably all know that, but it's just kind of mapping out. And that's why maybe the last webinar, if we look back on it, is very important, because we spoke about the periodization of your athletic development programs. So having an opportunity to sit down and plan where you're going to test these endurance capacities is very important. And if it goes over the 8 weeks, that's okay too. But it's important, I would say, that if you're doing a test, that you retest and you retest and you retest, and you're constantly tracking those athletes and you're constantly giving those athletes feedback. So that's our endurance. And I suppose when we think of conditioning, we always go to the aerobic side of the house. and we kind of, I won't say forget, but we might pass the speed side of the house off a little bit as being not as important. But I suppose if we look at the way the game is going nowadays, speed is becoming a hugely important component for all positions. Gone are the days where, you know, the full forward might be in play for 2 or 3 minutes and then have a 2 or 3 minute break. Now the full forward is sprinting to the ball, getting his score, or handing the ball off, sprinting back, defending, and it's the same on the other side of the field. So that ability to repeat that speed exposure in games is becoming more and more common. And when we look at testing speed, I suppose it's a little bit tricky, because if we want a really, really gold standard, we want a true objective of speed, we're going to have to pay for speed gates, or we're going to have to rent a facility potentially where speed gates are part of that process. Or if we're lucky enough to maybe have an S&C coach with our team who has speed gates, potentially that's an area we can focus on. But the gold standard obviously would be to use fitness testing gates. Now, again, what we would say here is, look, it's not perfect. It's not ideal. It's definitely something that, you know, we'd try and stay away from if we do have the facility to test with gates. But there's nothing wrong with testing with a stopwatch as well. And there's a couple of things that we can do, and I've experienced throughout the years, that may make them a little bit more reliable. Having 2 testers, for example, on the start line and the finish line. Having a countdown, 3, 2, 1, the 2 testers pressing their stopwatches. When the player finishes the sprint, the 2 testers stop their stopwatches. That way you're getting 2 different measures of the test. You can take the average of those 2 tests, and it's becoming a little bit more reliable than potentially what it would have been with 1 test. Now, again, I would be saying to you on the line, take that with a pinch of salt, because I am definitely pushing the speed gate option, but I am very cognizant that is not an option for everyone on the call, because of the expense of them. So untrained testers have had some of the problems with the stopwatch, I suppose, is a heavy pitch. If you're doing it on a pitch, it's a slippy all-weather surface. If you're doing it on a slippy all-weather surface, it's potentially a different stopwatch that you might use from test 1 to test 2 could have a differing result, or a different timer. So there's all those types of things to take into consideration when we are doing the fitness testing. And with that being said, then I suppose it's important, whether we're using the stopwatch or we're using the fitness testing gates, that we measure with a meter wheel if we have it. We can see that from the video here. We're consistently measuring the distances, and we're using the same equipment all the time. We're getting the same tester all the time, if at all possible. And that will just make it as reliable as possible. So we can just see there the idea behind the meter wheel. So what we have here on the slides, guys, is just a test from the side, a 10-meter test from the side, and a 10-meter test from the front. And if we are in a position where we're going to be doing some speed testing with our players, a couple of the things to just take note of, I suppose, is when you have the gates at the start line, that you maybe get a tape line 30 centimeters back from the start line, and the athlete starts with their toe on that line. Okay, look, you decide the stance that you want them to start in. Generally, it's a split stance. Okay, loading on 1 foot, and the reason they're 30 centimeters behind the line is because initially when they take off, their hand or their knee doesn't break the line or doesn't break the speed yet. So it just makes it that little bit more reliable. So that's step 1. Step 2 then, I suppose, is having your cones clearly marked out at whatever that distance is that you're going to measure. Is it 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, etc., etc. Having your cones clearly marked out. If you're going with the stopwatch approach, having a tester potentially at each of those markers or each of those meters. And if not, having your speed gates lined up and making sure that you have gone through a run of trial runs yourself, just to make sure that they are working and you are getting a generated feedback time from there. In terms of the distances that we'd recommend that you measure, what we'd be saying there is your acceleration and your max velocity. Generally in hurling and football, your max velocity and your acceleration is going to be hit within. Them slides are moving for me there now. I'll take them back. Okay, so generally your max velocity is going to be hit within 40 to 50 meters, and generally you're gonna be hitting your acceleration within 5 to 10 meters. So they're probably good recommendations or good metrics that we would potentially be measuring. So anywhere between 5 and 10 meters for your acceleration, and anywhere between 40 and 50 meters for your max velocity exposure. And if we can get a metric of those maybe 2-3 times a year, we can see if our players are actually changing within their speed capacities. Okay, now we're just going to move on here. So I think someone has taken control of the slides. They're interested in seeing the drop jumps. So we'll just go back and we'll go to the agility or the change of direction. So again, the speed that we just showed you is linear in nature, so it's a straight line speed. So we also need to be cognizant that within our games, there's going to be changes of direction. There's going to be bouts of linear interspersed with a cut or a change of direction or a turn. Or maybe if you're defending, you're going to have to drive out to the defender, reset, shuffle left, shuffle right, and reverse back. So there's going to be various movements. So with that being said, what we have said is a simple 505. Now, there's loads of agility type tests out there. You're probably familiar with seeing the T test or the Y test or the Illinois test, but we've gone with a 505. It's proven to be valid and reliable measure, potentially with timing gates. The time T test can be reliable as well on a field-based scenario. And what we'll do here is we'll just show you a video of this. So you can see here on the left-hand side, I'm 5 meters back from the speed gates, and then there's another set of cones 5 meters past the speed gates. Now, what I'd say here is I've seen it done with 10-meter run-ins and 5-meter run-ins. Again, like I said before, whatever you test at the start, keep that measurement going so you can have a reliable test. We've gone with 5 meters. So what this test is going to show us is I'm going to sprint past the speed gates. As soon as I sprint past the speed gates, the time will start. I'll go to the end cone, turn, and come back. And that's my time. So my time is when I break the speed gates, the first time, turn, to when I break the speed gates the second time, and turn.
Yeah.
I will just show them one more time. And I'm laughing there because I fell over my ankle the first time we recorded, so it's just something to be careful with as well. What I'd say to you then on these videos as well, guys, is it's important that we get a measure on the athlete turning off the right foot and on the athlete turning on the left foot. We on a testing day then as well, we want to be cognizant we're not placing too much stress on the players. So I'd be saying to you, potentially a max 2 on either side is loads on the day of testing with these players. Okay, I'm going to pass you back to Connor there now. Connor, I'm going to stop presenting and leave you take control.
Just while we are in the process of changing over there, lads, I'm just going to put a question to you. So, should sprint and running tests be held on different days?
I'll take that one, Connor, and if I miss that, you can pop in. I suppose that is very much dependent on the time you have with your athletes and on the process you have in place with your team. If it's a case where you don't want to be testing on different days due to time constraints, absolutely, it's okay. Absolutely. If it's a case that you want to be really, really specific and you want to get a true measure of endurance or a true measure of strength without anything negating to that fact of that modality, then I would test 2 of them on 2 different days. But with that being said, if you do it on day 1, so let's say, for example, I do a strength testing protocol followed by an endurance testing protocol, that's absolutely fine as long as I do that the exact same way the next time I test. And that's probably the most important thing I would try and get across for that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason.
Yeah, I agree. I think the key there is that you're clever with your sequencing of tests too, because I suppose the aerobic style tests will have a high energy demand. So going in from an aerobic test into a maximum strength test isn't going to be particularly fair on the athlete either. So provided you're smart with the scheduling and the rest intervals, it should be okay. Moving on next, so we're going to look at anthropometrics. So again, these are very important for the youth athletes on the call, and you'll see why in just a sec. So again, we chose, I suppose, 3 tests that you'll see in just a sec that are very easy to implement, and every club, every coach can do it. So first of all, they're non-invasive. They can be done by relatively unskilled people. So again, you don't need to have a background in S&C to administer them. They can be simply monitored over time. So again, that's the key, as Jason is saying, that if we are implementing a test or looking at a physical quality, it's important that we are reverting back to it and constantly seeing how things are changing and how our athletes are progressing or regressing. So they're, as I said, they're easy to administer. They're relatively cheap in terms of equipment, and it is simple equipment. They don't take too long, so you'll fly through your squad. And again, everyone can do them, which is very important too. So looking at them in practice, so I suppose what anthropometry is it's looking at the size and proportions of the human body. So you'll see in the first video, that's a measure of height. So myself or Jason aren't too blessed vertically there, and we're probably gone beyond our growth spurt. But for those of you working with youth athletes on the call, it's a very, very important measure that you're tracking over time. To just flag if your athletes are going through their peak height velocity, or in layman's terms, or growth spurt, because if they are, their performance may decrease momentarily, but if your program is very well structured and well targeted, when they come out the back end of that, they will have set the foundations of the house in terms of speed and strength. So being aware that your athletes are going through it is very important, and the best way to be aware is to test it ultimately. Then on the right, simple weight test on your weighing scales, and then on the bottom, a sit and reach test. So again, all those three tests are very easy to administer, and good to track longitudinally in terms of body composition, in terms of flexibility, mobility, and as I say, very, very important with respect to our youth teams and youth athletes here, when we're trying to track their growth and maturation, because again, everyone develops at different rates, and it's important that we give people a chance to develop and be aware of when they are maybe going through that growth spurt, and that we have accommodations to allow them to do that as easily as possible. So the fourth test we look at then is our overhead squat. So this is more of a screening test. So again, it's very simple to administer, and it's good to infer information on the athlete off. So I'll just play the video. Very easy to, I suppose, administer, to score and to screen, and it looks at, I suppose, the ability of the athlete to perform a moving pattern in isolation and without the complications of trying to do it with a sport specific skill. So here we see Jason doing an overhead squat. So the reason, I suppose, we're looking at that is when Jason is doing the overhead squat here with the dowel above his head, there's a couple of things he has to try and do to control his body. So that overhead position of his arms, I suppose he has to have sufficient upper body mobility and strength to hold this position. And if he doesn't, we'll be able to spot and flag if he does have any compensatory patterns through his shoulder, his arm, his thoracic spine, and we also have a look at his lower body mobility and strength. So with the younger athletes, if they're doing this movement and we see their knees starting to wobble in, or their heels lifting, we can act upon that and implement more, I suppose, lower body strength work and mobility work to try and address the muscular imbalances or the movement pattern imbalances that are there. So with that in mind, the overhead squat test it's very practical, and it is time efficient, and it's quick to do. And I suppose if you are doing it, I would recommend videoing your athletes, so again you can track them longitudinally over time, over the season, because I suppose if you do it in January, just score them there and then, it is hard, I suppose, to infer a true change in performance. It's very black and white in the scoring in terms of 0, 1, 2, and 3. You could have an athlete with a low 2 per se in January, but they might have improved and have a high 2 per se in mid-season, but their score is still 2. However, if you have that video in front of you, you'll be able to see yourself with your coach's eye if they have improved. So just videoing the test from that perspective is something that might be handy. So the last section then, that we're looking at is the reliability and validity of our testing. And it's something that we have referred to throughout, and it's something that we, I suppose, have tried to hit home the importance of. Before I go into the slides, validity, ultimately, it's asking whether or not the test that we're administering is measuring what we want it to measure. So if we're administering a 3RM back squat test, are we confident that we're measuring our athlete's lower limb muscular strength? If we're administering a 1.2 kilometer time trial, are we confident that's a measure of aerobic capacity? So when we're choosing our tests, and I suppose that the tests we've presented to you this evening aren't an exhaustive list. You can pick and choose yourself and do a little research there. But if you are choosing a test, you have to be aware that if you wanted to test a specific quality, you have to be sure that it is in fact testing that specific quality and not testing something else. Whereas on the other hand, reliability, which I'll show in a second, that's looking at whether or not your results are consistent. So from test to test, are there huge changes? If there are, chances are that test isn't reliable, and you can't be confident if a true change has occurred. So that goes back to the validity again. Is it ecologically valid? So what does that mean? That means in practice, again, going back to, I suppose, what we've seen in the field and tests being administered that aren't representative of the demands of the sport or the moving patterns of the sport. So again, can we choose tests that mimic the demands of the sport and I suppose look at how our athletes can cope with these demands in a more controlled environment? If we can, that's great, because we can improve their performance, their sport-specific performance from that. So again, it's very important that when we are choosing a test, and it should be one of the first considerations we're worried about is if it's reliable and if it's valid. So if it's valid, is it testing what it's meant to test? So is it doing what it's saying on the tin? Whereas on the other hand, the reliability, again, that's looking at, I suppose, the consistency of your tests from test to test. So if you, for example, in I suppose simple terms, if you wage your player 5 times within 5 minutes, well then, there hasn't been sufficient time for the player to take on water or food or whatever. So those 5 values should all be relatively the same. And if they're not, then that test isn't reliable because there's too much change. So the sources of variability, and I suppose that may impact whether or not our test is reproducible. So can we be confident that if we test in January, if we test in March, if we test in whenever that may be, from test to test to test, if it's giving us scores that we can trust ultimately and that we can act upon. So that variation and that error, that measurement error can come from a number of places. First of all, it can come from our equipment. So while I did say earlier that my jump is reliable and valid when compared to our jump mat, it is provided the person administering the test knows what they're looking for. So when you're doing the test on my jump, you'll video them doing the jump, and you'll be asked to choose the frame ultimately where they leave the ground and where they come back in contact with the ground. And if you're not confident and if you don't know what you're looking for there, well, then there's going to be sources of variation between tests. And again, if I administer a test and someone else administers it and we choose different times when the athlete leaves the ground, then there's going to be variation between us as testers. So going back to what Jason said there, if we are administering tests, try to keep it to the same person administering them throughout the season, because then you're going to reduce that potential, I suppose, error and tester error. So if it's the same person throughout, you'll probably negate that as best you can. And again, going back to the example I gave with the weighing scale, so biological variation we're looking at here. It's the reliability of whether or not that test has taken into account, I suppose, changes in our athlete's state. If an athlete is dehydrated or hasn't taken on enough nutrition, then that's going to negatively impact their performance during the jump test. However, if again we're going back to that weighing scales analogy, if we test them in a brief period of time, those results should be the same in those 5 minutes. However, if we left a day or two between, the results we get will probably be different because the athlete might have hydrated differently or eaten differently. So again, scheduling is very important here, and being aware of the different, I suppose, constraints that testing does have, and as best trying to minimize them as best as you possibly can. So Jason, if you want to take control again, it's back to you.
Yeah, and just before we go into the next and the last phase of the PowerPoint, guys, is just the data interpretation and the recommendations of what we do with the fitness testing results. But I suppose before we get to that point, what are we saying or what are we recommending from fitness testing point of view for you as the coach on the line? Well, what we're probably saying is we recommend that you test players' height, you test players' weight, you test players' sit and reach or a measurement of their flexibility. You test maybe a 1.2, or if you have the facilities, a yo-yo test. You test some form of strength, be it a wall sit, a press up, or a repetition max test, and you test some sort of a speed measure throughout the season. That sounds extensive, but again, if we can tailor it to look at potentially testing different, like that question on the call, Kev, testing different modalities on different windows of sequencing, well, then that's something we could definitely look at. And that's probably something that's going to guide you, the coach on the line, as to whether your program is working or not. If your players are potentially need an intervention in their nutrition, they need an intervention, particularly the youth players, they need an intervention in terms of rest because they're very busy. So it's things like that that's probably going to inform you as coach. And they're probably the key metrics we would be saying that we'd recommend to measure. Okay, so the last part of the presentation then, guys, so it's just the data interpretation. So
sorry,
with
Jason,
that,
just linking to what you were speaking about there. So quick question for you again, please, and maybe Connor can jump in as well. So what age would you start testing at?
Yeah, well, in terms of that question, I was hoping that question would come up, because I suppose you can start testing from any age, really. What are you testing, I suppose, is the key metric there. Like, if we look at this webinar is tailored at the youth and the adult player, so we're looking at maybe from under 13s right up to under to 17s for youth, and from 18s plus then for senior. And if we think about the testing of youth, well, we can definitely test the youth player height, their standing height and seating height. We can definitely test their weight. We can absolutely test their overhead squat. We can test their press up. We can test a wall sit. All of those tests aren't going to put strenuous workload on the player. They're not going to fatigue the player that much. And it's something that can be done in a very safe manner for the youth. If we move on to the adult side of the house then, and we do have the equipment, we can potentially look at the more specific tests, or the tests like the percentage RMs or the 1.2s or the speed in that regard. But not forgetting as well at adult level, height is very important, weight is very important, flexibility is also very important. So again, it's incumbent of all those areas.
Thank you, Jason. There's another really interesting question here from Martin Crummy.
Yeah.
And there's also one from Tony Dalton. However, we will hold some D and address them then. I think it will open up some good conversation at that stage.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Bear with us. So those questions, guys, and we'll get to them at the very end. So in terms of the data interpretation and the recording of data, so it can be done in a number of ways. It can be done hand notation, pen and paper. It can be done on Google Docs. It can be done on Microsoft Excel. Whatever way you'd like to do it, or whatever way you're most comfortable with doing it, is fine. But it is important that we do record that data. It is very important that we sit down and interpret that data, and we see what the data is telling us. Otherwise, we're just going to test for the sake of testing. We're going to basically bring our players in, fatigue our players, and send them away. And we all know that players potentially don't really like fitness testing, but the bulk of them don't. So we have to weigh that up. Are we actually going to bring them in to make them tired and do something they don't like? Or are we going to bring them in and actually give them positive feedback on the testing where they can develop? So that's hugely important. And with the data recording, then it's very, very important that we just look at the components of the tests and the comparisons of the test. So interpreting the data in a user-friendly way. So effectively what we're looking for there is we're looking for players who play in specific positions versus players who play in those specific positions. That's an area or a rabbit hole we can go down. What are our forwards in comparison to each other? What are our defenders in comparison to each other? Our midfielders? And then we can go look at the bigger picture of the whole team. So instead of just looking at, okay, my team average for 1.2 is a 4 minute, 10 second, we can look at the forwards, midfielders, backs, and likewise in strength qualities. So those type of areas, that's where we're really kind of honing in on the data that we have collected, and we're really making really actionable areas on that data. And when we look at that, then I suppose what's really, really important here, what I've put up here is just a sample data set that I put together just for the purpose of this. And it looks at the height, the weight, body mass index, yo-yo distance, standing long jump, push up, sit and reach, and counter movement jump. So with that being said, I have a number of players. I have the average score for those players. I have the standard deviation or the range. So what that is it's the score above the average with the top player and the score below the average. And it's taken that little range into consideration. And that's effectively classified as the median. And then we're looking at the player or the players with the highest score in terms of our max, and the player with the lowest score in terms of our min. So when we look at the number of players then, so this is a simple table that we could potentially use with our teams. We're looking at the number of players that we have across from left to right. We're looking at the average scores across from left to right of those players. We're then looking at the range of those scores. So if we look at one here, for example, let's say we look at weight, okay? So on column 3, we look at weight, and the average weight was 60.66 kgs, and the standard deviation was 9.12. So effectively what that means is the top players, or the heaviest players, weighed 69.78 kilos. Okay, my maths was good there. And the lightest player weighed 50, just less than 52. My maths is not so good there. But that's what we're looking at, okay? We're looking at the range between the average. And if we take those outliers out of it, so we might have one player who's potentially a lot heavier than the rest of the squad, and we might have one player who's potentially lighter than the rest of the squad, they can actually throw the metrics of the team average out the window. So that's when we potentially look at the median. And that takes those outliers out of there. I'll never forget, I remember we done testing with a club team a long time ago, and we'd one incredibly strong player. And that player was so strong, he took the team average strength up through the roof. But then when we actually stripped it back, the team actually wasn't that strong when we took that player out of it. So that's the importance of looking at the median. And then you have those outliers there for your max and your mins. So that's a really simple snapshot of potentially where you could get to with your data, and potentially how you can make an informed decision on the data that you have in front of you. And with that, moving on from that, then you're looking at the practical applications of that. So you're trying to determine the question that needs answering. So I referred to it earlier, the players aren't fit. Well, then you're doing a test to determine if they are fit or they're not fit in terms of their aerobic conditioning or their strength or whatever modality it is. And then you select that test to answer that question. So if the coach says, or you feel as the coach, that the players aren't fast, well, then do a speed test, test it, and see if they are fast, or see the players that aren't fast, because then you're specifically answering that question. Collect the data. Yes, that's important. Evaluate your results. So what are your results telling you? Are your results telling you that Connor is really, really strong? Connor is really, really powerful. He's really, really fast, but his movement quality is poor. What's that then telling you? Well, it could be telling you that he's really strong, he's really fast, but there's potential of an injury down the line if we don't improve his movement quality. And they're the kind of little nuances that will really interest you as the coach, and they'll allow you to give that athlete that you're dealing with real specific and individualized feedback on how that athlete can improve their athletic ability by putting that intervention in place. Again, then it's always important to retest and evaluate if that has worked. And if it hasn't worked, that's fine. You just change the process. Sometimes players and coaches can get really, really drawn down on the fact that their players aren't improving. But all we need to do is just take a step back, re-gauge where we're going, develop a little new plan or develop a new program, and see if that works. Because all we're trying to do is do our best and always assess. So if we're not testing our players through some form, be it simple measures like height, weight, or through complex measures like drop jump or standing long jump, we are just guessing. So we need to be cognizant of that. Okay, Connor, I think you have 2 or 3 slides to go to, and then we'll get to the questions.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll just take back control there. Okay. Yeah. So again, as I mentioned a few slides ago, the list we've put together here isn't exhaustive. There are alternative tests that you can use, depending on who's going to administer them, depending on what equipment you have, depending on if you have one testing day or if you have multiple. So again, that'll go back to the sequencing question from earlier. So we felt it was important just to give, I suppose, a graphical illustration of what your testing regimen might look like in practice. So again, we've boxed off all the areas that you need to assess there to have a good profile of your athlete. So again, these can interchange depending on what you have access to, and time constraints and equipment constraints. But it is handy just to, I suppose, have that initial document there in front of you to say, right, have I ticked off a lower limb strength and power test to be confident that, right, if my athlete is strong, can they express that strength during a run, a sprint, a jump? So it's a nice little checklist to have. And again, if needs be, you can change it, and we're happy to I suppose take emails after the fact if you have any questions on alternative tests you could use to what we've presented as well. So tonight's presentation tied in nicely to the recently Be Ready to Play initiative. So what that is, ultimately, it's bi-weekly programming. So there's programs every 2 weeks looking at improving the strength, speed, and conditioning of our players, and it's catering for all levels. So our youth players, our adult players that may be new to the gym and have a low training age, or our adult players that are a little bit more advanced. So we'll be doing a leash specific launch in early April. That'll just talk you through how best to, I suppose, comprehend and use the stuff yourself, and use it with your team and with your athletes, and how to get the most out of it. But in advance of that, we would recommend that you sign up. So if you just key that into Google, it'll take you into the GAA Learning Portal, and it's very easy to sign up from there. Download the content, so you'll get PDFs of the programs. There's also videos as well that you can watch them in practice, which is very important because we're visual learners, and it's nice to be able to see something in front of you. So look, in advance of our own launch, we would recommend that you do sign up. Use the stuff until then, and we'll go through in a few weeks' time how we recommend that you get the most out of it. So again, we've looked at a lot in the previous webinar series, and this Be Ready to Play program will probably tie it all in together and be the final piece of the jigsaw, and that it's that program that everyone wants. I suppose that's the first thing a coach wants and looks for, and a player looks for, is that, how can I get this into a program, or where's my program? So this will give you that option, and it's a nice option to have. And with that, as I say, we've done a fairly exhaustive athletic development series now. So we've looked at planning and periodization, we've looked at season planning, and how you might integrate periodization into that. We've looked at health and well-being, so we've looked at nutrition, load monitoring, all that sort of thing there, recovery as well. And we've looked at conditioning the player as well. So again, are we implementing training protocols and practices that are best suiting the demands of the game? So we want to stay away from the laps and be more context specific to what our players are going to be facing when they cross the white lines in a few weeks to come. And we've also looked at injury prevention or a reduction is probably a better term there. So when you get this slide set out, if you click the links that are there, so if you click aerobic condition, you'll be taken to our YouTube channel, and you get the aerobic conditioning webinar, and all the way down along for the other 4 as well. So it's a nice little resource to have to check back into, and just progress your own learning too. So in conclusion, hopefully tonight we've enlightened you to a basic understanding of fitness testing, what it is. It's not scary. It's easy to implement for every club, regardless of skill level or access to equipment or time constraints. There's something there for everyone, and it's vital that you do it. The importance of fitness testing before competition. So our competition is ultimately our games, and we want to see if our players are ready to perform and meet the demands of the games they're going to be facing. And with that, when and why should we test? So obviously we're not going to be doing an aerobic test at the weekly championship. So being cognizant of the context of your tests as well, and what we can do when we have minimal equipment. So again, we have given alternatives to the club that mightn't have a lot of equipment, but we've also looked after the club that might have plenty of equipment too. So with that in mind, that's it from us. And if you do have any questions, you can fire them into the chat box now. And thanks for tuning in.
Okay, thanks very much, lads. So I am going to go to the question now, folks, and just before I do, I'm just considering the time as well. So I would like to thank everybody for tuning in with us tonight. I'd just like to mention there, if it's okay, there's somebody from Scotland there, I think, that's tuned in with us tonight, and also the night that Mike Quirk was on with us. So thank you very much for that. It just shows, I suppose, the reach of the internet and social media and all that. So I'd just like to mention you there. Thanks for tuning in with us. So yeah, like that now again, folks, the lads are going to stay and answer as many questions as needs be. Please feel free to join us. If you do have to log out at this stage, we completely understand. So thank you all, and I'm now going to put the first question to Connor, and then Jason, I might fire one at you after that. So Connor, is it recommended to set standard targets for each of the tests, or to get the player's baseline and just monitor player improvement as each player is physically different? And that's at adult level.
Yeah, I think that the key part to that question is the final line there, that each player is physically different, and that's very important to realise that our players are individual. And again, you will have seen a few slides ago the process to go through when we are fitness testing. So ultimately, if we're administering a test, we have a question to answer. So in order to answer that question, we need to select the test. And it's very important that, I suppose, when we're selecting a test, we're doing it with implementing a program in mind. So if we are implementing a program, ultimately we need to have a baseline measure of what our player is at. So again, if we don't have a baseline measure, we can't confidently infer that, right, our program had a positive or a negative effect with regards to their performance in whatever that may be. So if it's a block of strength training, has they gotten stronger from their baseline test to their test in 6 weeks' time? With that in mind, going back to your question, I suppose every player is individual and will have different qualities. So it's important that we're not lumping them all into the same box. So particularly in the maximal strength realm, we might have a big lad in the squad and a small lad in the squad. And if we're just looking at the absolute strength value, so how much they have in the bar, well, that's not fair on both lads, because I suppose the smaller fella, in terms of relative strength, so his body weight, he might be just as strong pound for pound as the bigger fella. So what I'd be recommending there is, if you are implementing maximum strength tests, you look at the relative value rather than the absolute. So don't just look at 100 kilos as 100 kilos. Look at what that is in proportion to that person's body weight. For someone with a 1RM back squat, that could be 1.7 times their body weight, which is probably strong enough, because that's going back to the question, how strong is strong enough? And if we're making our players any stronger than this, are we going to improve performance? So again, if it's 100 kilos for one fella, that might be 1.2 times his body weight. He might need to get stronger. Might be 1.7 times for the other fella. Maybe he needs to focus on his power or his technical skills. So I suppose being aware of that and applying it to each individual case as best you can within the constraints of your testing and your time, that'll be my recommendation. With regards to mass or the speed or the aerobic testing, there is normative data out there for targets, and if you want to get your players to, typically for mass, you might be looking at 4.6 or 4.8, and if you're speed testing, there's stuff out there too. So hopefully that's a good answer.
It is, I think. Thank you very much, Connor. That's an excellent question. Thank you, Martin, for that. To you, Jason, please. So is weight measurement really essential? Teenage boys and girls, and body image is a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, it's just another very, very valid question. Very, very interesting, actually. No, it's not essential. Absolutely not. I suppose it is something that it's a tool in your toolbox that you can use. That's probably the best way I would answer it. If it's something that you feel that your players are potentially not that engaged in doing, okay, there's a couple of different ways we can go about it. We can go about, if you're dealing with youth players in particular, you can potentially make contact with the parents. You can potentially give individual feedback back to the player, and look, if that's still making the player feel uncomfortable, well then absolutely that's not something that we'd be recommending, because what we're ultimately trying to do in the GA and take S&C aspects out of it, we're looking at recruitment and retention, and we want our players coming back to us to the training field all the time, and if we're going to be doing something that's putting them in a position where they're uncomfortable, well then absolutely we would not be doing that. With that being said, is it essential? No, but does it give us a metric that we can track from when a player comes into our club at 14 until that player leaves the club at 45? It is absolutely something that we can track. It's something that takes very, very little time. It's something as the players get more familiar with, and as the players go through our pathway within our clubs, that they can actually do themselves. It's something that they can track themselves. So there's positives and there's probably negatives to it. What I would say, it's up to you as the coach to probably try it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, fine. If it does work, go with it. That's probably what I would say.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Thank you for the question, Tony. Okay, folks, so at this stage, if you would like to pose any more questions, or if you'd like to open up your mic, the lads will stay on the line for as long as needs be. The lads, if you'd like to as well. Yeah, Jason.
I might just jump on to add to Connor's point there. So Martin, I think it was that had that question. Martin, if you are looking for normative values around adult players, there's potentially there's a guy called Shane Malone, Shane Rowe, and Jason McGann who've published normative values within the GA. What I would say to any coach on the call who's probably at that level of getting to those research papers to look at that normative values is just have it in the back of your mind what's actually in that research paper. Is it 12 players, for example, or is it 6 players, or is it 30 players? Are they intercounty players? Are they club players? Are they school players? Are they hurlers or are they footballers? Because sometimes we can get drawn, and I'm guilty of it myself, we can get drawn down the line of grabbing a paper with a table on it that says an 18-year-old should be able to bench press 60 kilos. And that could be drawn off of many different areas within the GA. So making sure, I think to add to what Connor was saying there, which is really good, just making sure that it's specific to the cohort of players that you're dealing with, that's probably definitely the most important thing I would be saying.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Okay. Yeah, okay. I think that we've probably come to the end of our question now at this stage, lads. So we will turn off our mics and turn off our cameras, folks, but we will hold the line. If there's anybody who would like to have a chat with us, please do so. Thank you all again. We'll talk soon. Okay, we have a question here, lads, please.
Yeah, fire ahead, Mike.
Okay. Instead, from Stephen. Okay, instead of a sit and reach, is there a test that can measure hamstring separately?
Yeah, there is. There's a lying leg raise. Can we reach 90 degrees with a dowel? That's something that potentially you could use. Again, it's like anything, I think, Stephen, it's subjective to you as the tester, to retest reliability of it. Is it you that's going to be testing that all the time? But that's definitely something that you can use if you don't have a sit and reach box. You can get the player to lie on their back. You can get a dowel or a hurley or a broom handle and put it straight up beside their hip, and you can see if that player can reach 90 degrees, and you can base it off that. Again, it's a simple, effective test that you can use to test hamstring flexibility.